Welcome to another episode of What to Say and How to Say It. I'm Nina Rosner, and I'm with our favorite licensed professional counselor, Kyle Hargrove. And today we're going to talk about hearts and sealed off hearts and what happens with that. I had a friend a number of years ago that drew me a picture and said, "This is what I feel like my heart is." And it was inside of a mason jar. And it had a lid on it, the whole 9 yards. And this morning you sent me a photograph of, I'm not exactly, you're gonna have to describe this in great detail, but it looked like plastic plus heart of some sort. And it wasn't escaping. Like, tell us what you have there, Kyle.
Yeah. Well, actually, in reality, it's a rock.
Okay,
Yeah, and it's a heart-shaped rock.
cool.
But and you can see it's gray. And for
Mhm.
those of you that are looking, you can see it. Those of you listening, it's a grayish brown river rock found here in the Bosque River in Texas. And I don't know. I just had a thought cross my mind. I think God puts these ideas and visions in my mind sometimes of what it might look like for how some of us are feeling.
Mm.
And I was inspired to vacuum seal it. And so this is a vacuum sealed heart. And
Oh,
it
there's
is
nothing get in there if
no,
you vacuum sealed it.
there's nothing in there but the rock. There's no air.
Wow. Okay.
And it's gray and it's hard, you know, like a rock. But I just was contemplating why it is difficult sometimes for people who are in the midst of issues and conflicts and difficulties that they can name it, they can identify it, they can put their finger on it, they can talk to a therapist about it, they can talk with their spouse about it, um, but it doesn't seem to get any better.
Mhm.
And I think a part of that is sometimes that we have drawn our hearts into a place of protection, and that's what vacuum sealing does, for food.
Mhm.
It protects the food because uh, what is necessary for you and I to live is the mortal enemy of food, and that's air.
Yeah.
Air is what destroys and breaks down food and makes it not fresh and not good and not pretty. Um, but you and I have to have it. But when it comes to our hearts and going through situations where our hearts get hurt, many times our default is to cover it up, to protect it so that nothing, vacuum seal it
Mhm.
in a literal kind of way, so that nothing can get in and harm it again.
Mhm.
And that's a natural way of I think protecting ourselves from being damaged or being hurt or offended again the same way or by the same person. Um, but there's a price to be paid for that, and that's kind of what I wanted to talk about today, or maybe just kind of let's let's get this out there so people can do their own emotional self-evaluation and say, have I covered my heart up
Mhm.
to protect it? And while doing that, in essence, I've been putting myself in a situation where not only does nothing get in, but nothing gets out.
Oof.
Nothing's coming out of here
Yeah,
unless I cut it with a knife or a pair of scissors, and it's not
yeah,
able to breathe.
that's brutal. That's unfortunately super, super true. So we put it in there to protect it, kind of like walls, building walls. It's the same kind of concept. But you know, you can't connect with anyone when your heart is completely sealed off.
Exactly.
And the thought that's coming to my head right now is the ones that it's a cacophony of voices that I hear from people saying, "Yeah, but you don't know what I've been through. You don't know what he's done to me. You don't know what she's done. You don't know what she's said. You don't know how he." And they've been so incredibly injured. And so they're like walled off this thing, just sealed it all up. And first of all, how do you know if you're that guy? Because there's a difference between having a healthy boundary and sealing off your heart. So how would somebody know if they've gone too far?
I think one of the first things to look at is the amount of bitterness and hurt that we maintain. Because when you seal yourself up, you seal everything with it that it has happened to it. You seal the past. You close off anything from the present and the future, and you're bound to what has already happened. And that's where we maintain the bitterness and the anger. People who live in bitterness, anger are living in the past anyway. Mm-hmm. And people who live in anxiety and worry, they're off onto the future. But today we're talking about when we seal this off and when we try to protect ourselves. And so the first thing I'm going to say is if you are still absorbed in bitterness or anger or hurt that you can't seem to move out of, get rid of, move past, however you want to look at it. Another thing I would probably identify is if you don't feel anything at all. Because human beings are emotional creatures before anything else. We're made by God in his image as emotional machines. And it's important that we understand that we can't shut part of our emotions off in order to not feel without shutting literally all of our emotions off. You can't shut down the negative to say, I'm only going to enjoy positive emotion. I'm only going to enjoy and participate in emotion that feels good, because it's not a dial like a volume knob. It's a toggle switch.
Right.
Our emotions are on or they're off. And when we shut down to avoid the difficult things, we cease to enjoy the good things as well. So that numbness that comes as a result of being neutral, I think, is the other thing that we would probably look for to say, I've protected. And sometimes we have to protect our hearts. Don't hear me or either one of us saying it's not a necessity at times, because not protecting yourself and not setting up boundaries for yourself only sets you up to be hurt the same way again.
Right.
But when we do that and don't realize we've done it and then leave it that way, I think that's what we're talking about today.
Well, and I hear a lot, well, I keep thinking that he'll change. Same thing from the men. I keep thinking that she'll change. And I'm like, well, what evidence is there that that's possibly true, remotely true? Like, if they're doing the same, they've already told you who they are, and they're doing the same thing that they've already done. Why are you doing what you've already been doing? Why are you handing your heart to somebody who's demonstrated that they're not trustworthy with it? So there's that piece of it. But then on top of it, and this is kind of what I hear you saying, how do you be open-hearted towards a person, but also guard your heart? Because we're supposed to do that. So what's the difference between sealing up your heart and guarding it, if you will?
I would say that guarding it involves the intentional process of setting boundaries. Those boundaries are not going to set themselves. They're not going to just magically show up because you need them. It's an intentional process, and you have to determine what the boundary is, what it needs to be, and what it is. And then you're the one that has to walk forward and go through this appropriate confrontation with the individual or the people with whom the boundary affects. And you've got to explain to them, okay, this is what has happened. This is how I felt. I don't want to feel that way anymore.
Right.
And a first step is, I'm going to not allow you to make me feel that way anymore, or to do the things that have caused me to feel that way. And if you do those things, I'm going to have to make different choices. And so to me, that's the way that we go in that direction. But it's, like I say, it's a very intentional process, and it's something that we have to decide to do. It needs a little bit of planning and preparation, and understanding that things won't be the same at that point, they may return to a positive form, or it may be that the other person rejects your boundaries, and it could spell the end of that relationship or anything in between.
Well, and don't you see people when they're shutting down their hearts, sealing their hearts off, they're doing that not just with the person that, you know, they want something different from, but they're also doing that with themselves and with God. There's like this, I don't know, there's so much external focus on somebody else's behavior that there's no awareness of, okay, this is this thing in me that's getting set off, that I need to pay attention to that and work on that with God versus just focusing all this blame energy towards the other person. And I'm not saying that person did the right thing at all. They could do the wrongest thing ever, but to not be objective in that and not be able to, you know, have a solid identity enough to be able to go, okay, wow, that's messed up, man, versus getting all emotional about it. And, you know, you get the I'm tipped over piece versus the something doesn't seem right with you piece. And there's this completely different wisdom there in that second thing. Because when you're healed, when you're whole and mature and can have an open heart and you're responsible with it, you're not just shoving it around to everybody to fix. And you're also not blaming everybody else for it being broken or injured in the first place. You have this awareness that's both sides.
Right.
How do you get to that place?
Well, if someone wrongs you, if you invite me to a dinner party at your house, and while I am under the guise of going to the bathroom and I burglarize your home,
Okay.
you know, and you know, you later realize it was me, and you say, "Don't do that. That hurt my feelings. That's a bad thing. You shouldn't do that." And then you invite me a couple of weeks later back to another dinner party in your home. What do you think I'm going to do?
You're probably going to rob me again.
I'm going to rob you again.
Yeah, because I'm
Okay?
a full-on fool at that
Right.
point.
Because it did not get past me that robbing you was going to upset you the first time.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So pointing your finger at me and saying, you did bad, you bad person, and it's your fault, and you know, blah, 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 right, isn't going to change my mind about what I did to begin with. And I'm probably going to see an opportunity to do it again. Well, this crazy lady invited me back again. Well, I got so much good stuff the first time, you know, I'm going to see what I left behind and take it. So when we move that over and put it, you know, through the lens of a relationship, you know, we're taking from each other, we're hurting each other, we're doing things that aren't either positive for the emotional state, or they're not good for the relationship, or we're just forgetful, or we're not respectful. We do all kinds of different things that hurt one another. And in the context of that relationship, to just sit there and point the finger at somebody and tell them how bad they are and how much they've hurt me, and I expect you to be responsible for my feelings and for my recovery and for my healing and so forth, it's very delusional thinking.
Yeah.
So the only other place to go when it comes to that relational healing is back to myself. I can only change me. The only control I have over any other individual on the planet is the control of myself.
Yeah.
Because none of us like to be controlled. We object to it.
Highly.
And we fend it off when there is someone who tries to control us. You know, right? You know, we're all about being independent and not being controlled. So not only are people not going to respond well to you when you try to control them, it's going to be frustrating for you because you're going to see that you failed. The only place to go is inside. And that's not to blame yourself for everything, but it's to see where am I in this problem? You know, what is my role as a person in this relationship for the fact that this problem exists? And use common sense, use logic, listen to people you trust, talk to God about it, for crying out loud. Because he can show us more clearly and succinctly, probably, than anyone. And best he can convince us, he can change our hearts. He can convince us that here are the things we need to attack and to approach and to work on and to heal so that we can uncover our heart. We can open our heart back up and we can manage to intentionally become vulnerable to an appropriate extent within different types of relationships, and we can feel again.
So what's running through my mind is a couple of scriptures that seem to kind of connect with this. One is about being soft-hearted, not hard-hearted. And then and it was interesting that this notion of being stiff-necked came into that also. So you have a real, a stiff-necked person in the Bible is very stubborn, very the my way or the highway, like no way am I going to receive influence from you, which seems to correlate with a hard heart as well. Like that lack of being able to receive influence is a huge deal in relationships. And what I'm wondering is, if you're in a mindset where you feel like you have to have your way, right? So you're the one with the hard heart. You're the stiff-necked person. You probably don't know that that's you. You probably think that everybody's out to get you and you have to like have limits and protect yourself and just, people are wrong. And, it's like a total line, the whatever that is, that's so self-protecting. And I don't know what fuels all of that. Like, where does that originate and morph into that kind of serious, impenetrable lack of vulnerability? Because that's the thing you said that made me go, oh, yes. Because vulnerability is the key to connection, right? So
exactly.
Yeah. So if you don't have that and you see that missing with hard hearts and stiff-necked people, it's like, when you're talking about developing that, like, what would you do? How would you be aware? How could you become aware? And then what do you do to grow in that space?
Yeah. I wonder if it's kind of like the which came first, the chicken or the egg thing, because the word that comes to my mind when you ask that question, what causes the hard heart? Is it, it's victimitis. And although that's not an official word, it's one I use a lot because I think it's a condition. I really do. I think that
Fair.
That people who have been victimized and can't seem to get out of it, can't seem to fix it, can't seem to put themselves in places where it doesn't happen. If they were able to look from the outside in, they're looking for opportunities to be victimized. And I think perceiving that you're victimized or actually being victimized over and over and over again will create a hard heart.
Yeah.
And I think also a heart that's already hard for whatever reason is going to be the one that's looking, and in that human condition that our brain has, whatever we're looking for and focused on and maybe even obsessed with, we're going to see it and we're going to find opportunities for it to be true. And if we can't, then we will twist and turn things to where it makes us feel like it's true, whether anybody else feels that way or not.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think there's a lack of modeling of options. So one of the neat things that happened this week was I was meeting with our men's group. We do this 2.0 your marriage thing. So I get a group of women that are the wives. I get a group of men that are the husbands. And we do coaching separately because honestly, they really don't need to get together to improve their relationship.
Right now.
Yeah, no. Yeah. Like it's really cool to see the growth. And what was neat was with the men, we've been at this for a couple months, and what's cool is several of them were saying, I've gotten to the point where I'm not blowing up. I'm not losing my cool. I'm not screaming, yelling, throwing things, breaking stuff, that kind of stuff. The anger response reaction is a better word, is gone. Then I've done okay, so are you okay? And I'm trying to validate my person, and I'm listening and all that. And they're still being rude. And I'm like, I'm so glad you're in this spot where you're not tipped over. Like they're not emotional. They're just like, okay, so I no longer am angry and hurt. I don't like how I'm being treated, but I don't know what to do. And I think it's wrong. And it was really neat because being in that place that's just so cool. That's just such evidence of God healing people. But I think there's a huge lack of, what do I do in this space? What does it look like for somebody to respond in a healthy way when they're insulted, right?
Yes.
And so dealing with all that emotional stuff is super important, because then we can hear from the Lord and we know whether we're supposed to overlook that insult or whether we're supposed to address a fool in his folly in that moment, right? With hey, I love you. Can you say that again kindly? Because that's not who we are here, or whatever it is, with a smile on your face. And then people are like, oh, and you call them to a higher level of being. Like, I don't think people talk about that or see that very often, but it's really neat, because then you open the door for people to get into a space where they can soften their hearts towards others. They've worked out their heart stuff with the Lord, with themselves, and now they want to do that with their partner. But it's like, how do I balance the boundaries and have a soft heart? And I think it's what you're talking about with the guarding of our heart and choosing where and when to be vulnerable in a wise way.
Right. And I think, the question that you asked me a couple of minutes ago and, kind of ended up with, and how do you move through that space? And although I think there are things that we can do, risks, they all involve risk at that point. Once you've been hurt and you've covered your heart, you've protected it, and it's maybe had the opportunity to heal, and you've done the work, then you uncover it, and everything is going to feel like a risk.
Oh, true.
Going back into the same space or with the same person or with the same people, it's going to feel risky. And in order to do that and not have that victimitis kind of mentality, you've got to be willing to do it. You've got to do it intentionally and step out into the midst of a risk on purpose. Okay.
Well, don't you think that small risks calculated very, intentionally would be the place to start with that?
Absolutely.
Jump into the whole pool and it's like, no, I still don't know how to swim. That's a problem.
Yeah.
You're just going to be re-traumatized and regret the whole thing.
In therapeutic terms and psychological terms, we call that systematic desensitization.
Yeah.
In other words, we resensitize ourselves to a situation or an environment or a person systematically, a little bit at a time. We're not going to just go let happen what happens, whatever it is, what it is, no, we're not going to leave it to that. But that systematic reintroduction is going to be something that requires choice. It requires thought. It requires logic. It requires a plan. And I think that gets us a part of the way there. But I think the real softening part has to be supernatural. I think that the true, genuine softening of a heart, so that the compassion returns, that that other parts of passion and compassion and empathy and things like that, so that we see people with a loving heart instead of wondering what somebody is going to do to us or what they could do to us.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of ground between those two views. And I don't think we by ourselves, or even with the best help on the planet, are capable of spanning that entire distance alone. I think that we need the supernatural healing and love of God in order to achieve that.
Yeah, it's the Sunday school answer where Jesus is always the right answer. It always comes back to that. Yeah. So
I remember a story like that, and I probably don't have time to tell it all, but I know the punchline is, I know the answer is a squirrel, but I'm pretty sure it's Jesus. I don't know if you knew that story or not.
I don't, but I like to chase squirrels. I think our conversation had a few of them in it, and that's okay.
That's okay.
So what would you leave our listeners with around this topic of a sealed heart today?
when you realize your heart is sealed off, not only to the pain and the bad things, but also to being able to enjoy life and to live it abundantly. Understand that you're not alone. Understand that there is a way out of what feels like a prison, and understand that there are people who are willing to walk with you through that process. Also understand it's going to take some intentionality and the willingness to accept a little bit of risk, but it can be done. And it's true of all of us that we're a work in progress. And this is one of those situations where you just have to take the progress a little piece at a time and be appreciative of it and have gratitude for it and relish it for a moment and then move on to the next piece.
Oh, yes. Good stuff, Kyle. Thank you so much for these pearls today around this topic, the sealed heart. And if you guys are interested in learning more about how you can improve your relationship, pop over to our website, greaterimpactcouples.org, and grab a copy of 5 tools to stop walking on eggshells. You do not have to stay stuck in your relationship. You don't have to feel like you're feeling. We've helped lots of people get past that, move into the space where they're healthier, happier, and in more holy situations. Love you wildly. Thanks for popping by. And we will see you in comments and subscribe. Be sure to hit the subscribe button so you can follow us for the next episode. We'll talk soon.